Welcome to the Trinidad and Tobago Opposition's media briefing this Sunday, the 19th of January 2025, discussing crime and the criminal justice system. Today, Mr. Wayne Sturge, Attorney at Law and the UNC candidate for Toco Sangre Grande, and MP Saddam Hosein, the shadow for the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, will be presenting. Thank you for joining us. We will begin our broadcast shortly. In the meanwhile, please share the live.
So the Minister of Finance is killing us with tax. We are like prisoners in our own home. We are under attack. Come on, people. Sing it with me. Sing it on.
Tell them we fed up. Had them bag of lies. We fed up. Cause them is wolf in disguise. Fed up. Had them playing games. So we not voting them again. We fed up. Hope you understand. We fed up. B&M never had a plan. We fed up. And they using we. So we voting for the UNC. The claim say they love we. The claim say they care. The claim say. They don't have a clue what to do. But put taxes on me and you take back the food card. And they see things hard. The way we live like dog in the yard.
So why they moving so? I really don't know. Them don't like the poor people in the ghetto. This is what I want you to know.
Tell them we fed up. Had them back alive. We fed up. Cause them is wolf in disguise. Fed up. And they playing games. So we not voting them again. We fed up. Hope you understand. We fed up. B&M never had a plan. We fed up. And they using we. So we voting for the UNC. The claim say they love we. The claim say they care. The claim say. We was red and ready, now listen to me. Like the one telling we red and hungry. I hope all they see what they're doing to we. And they say they care about we.
We can't take it no more. This is for sure. It's time for the policy to go. Because the people don't want you anymore.
Tell them we fed up. Had them back alive. We fed up. Cause them is wolf in disguise. Fed up. And they playing games. So we not voting them again. We fed up. Hope you understand. We fed up. B&M never had a plan. We fed up. And they using we. So we voting for the UNC. The claim say they love we. The claim say they care. The claim say. Tell them we fed up. Yeah, the people crying.
Why the crime rate so high?
Fed up. Food prices gone up.
The people, why you know we fed up on that?
We fed up. So let's talk about now. We fed up.
How the baby grant and food grant gone.
Fed up. Yeah, you talk about the past.
The people, why you know we fed up on that?
We fed up.
Let's talk about now.
We fed up.
Let's don't talk about the past. Let's speak about now.
Do you know that in 2016, 66 liters of diesel cost $100? Today, under the P&M, you get 20 liters of diesel for $100. The diesel you paid $100 for under the UNC now costs $327 under the P&M, which directly affects the cost of food, transport, and services. Guess who I'm voting for next time?
Good morning, members of the media, those who are viewing us live on all our social media platforms. We welcome you to the first opposition press briefing for the year 2025. I am joined this morning by Mr. Wayne Sturge. Mr. Wayne Sturge is the prospective candidate for the United National Congress for the constituency of Toco Sangre Grande. and Mr. Sturge is no stranger to the political and legal landscape of Trinidad and Tobago. This year he will be celebrating his 27th year at the bar, prominent defense counsel in the criminal courts, and also he served as a former opposition senator in the 11th Parliament. This morning, myself and Mr. Sturge will address you members of the media and those who are listening to us live on very critical matters in relation to national security and in particular the criminal justice system. This morning I will address you on two very topical issues, one being the ongoing state of emergency, and the second is with respect to the disposal, the leasing and or sale of the Petrotrin refinery under the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act. So I'll start my presentation this morning in terms of raising certain issues with respect to the state of emergency that was declared by this PNM government on the 30th of December 2024 and has been continued for a period of 3 months when the Parliament met last Monday. A state of emergency was declared on the 30th of December, and since then we have seen no real tangible evidence or successes of the state of emergency. In fact, when we went to the Parliament to debate the extension, the government could not provide any cogent, compelling evidence to suggest that the state of emergency was in fact working, and it would have been in effect for around 15 days when we debated the extension. On the morning of that debate, 34-year-old Onella Parks was gunned down in Belmont on her way to work. Last night, it is now being reported that it was a double murder in Belmont, a 19-year-old and a 53-year-old, and they were recorded as murders number 16 and 17 for the year.
We have
will
had
also
within
remember
recent times
the gruesome killing
states of emergency.
for one of my colleagues and her husband, the attorney at law, Mrs. Kumari Baksh, and her husband, Nasheed Baksh. On All Year's night, after the state of emergency was declared, there was the assassination of a former prosecutor, Randall Hector. And under the emergency powers regulation, I don't believe any person was charged in connection for any of these
We have
murders.
had within recent
In fact, I
times
haven't seen any media release coming out from the police service indicating that any perpetrators or any suspects were detained or charged in relation to any of these 17 murders, the state of emergency having been declared. Under the regulations, the Minister of National Security has the power in order to issue detention orders. So we are now over 15 days, nearing probably 20 days of the state of emergency. And Minister Hines has only made one detention order that was published via legal notice. One detention order. The police may have been detaining through the powers given to them under the regulations, but under the minister's power, one person a detention order was issued for. And we have argued from the opposition's perspective that there was no proper plan for this state of emergency. In fact, Stuart Young, who was the acting Attorney General of the day, indicated to the country, I believe it was around 9 or 10 a.m. on the 30th of December, that there's a state of emergency, and we did not see the regulations until about 10 p.m. that night. But what we were told in the Parliament was something even more strange. The night in which the state of emergency was probably decided was the same night that the Prime Minister was holding a party at his Tobago's residence. We were then told by Stuart Young that around 1:07 a.m. of that morning, the President was informed that there are grounds to declare a state of public emergency. So while they were fetting, they were deciding on a state of emergency. Stuart Young tells the Parliament that 1:07 a.m. that morning, the President was made aware. And 19 hours later, after you tipped off all the criminals, they brought the regulations. So within that period, the police had no idea. No law enforcement officer had an idea of what they could have done because there were no regulations giving them any powers whatsoever. So again, we have emphasized that this was not a well thought out state of emergency. Then, when you go to the meat of the regulations, and I raised this issue again on several platforms, that the emergency powers regulation are powers that are already existing in existing law through the Firearms Act, through the Bail Amendment Act of 2023, through the Anti-Gang Act of 2021, legislation that the United National Congress opposition supported in the Parliament. So these are three very important pieces of legislation that law enforcement already has at its disposal. And in fact, I raised the issue that one regulation of the emergency powers regulation that criminalizes the possession of illegal firearms and ammunition, that the regulations makes it an offense. But when you look at the Firearms Act Section 6, it is already an offense to have in your possession firearm and or ammunition without a FUL, without a license. And in fact, the Firearms Act carries a harsher penalty than that of the Emergency Powers Regulation. And this point was also confirmed by Acting Chief Magistrate Brian Debedine in a particular matter, and a comment was being made in open court. So we told them that you have badly drafted regulations. You didn't think this thing off well. And they are coming to the population to say, well, look, we are doing something about crime. They have done nothing about crime in the last 9 years. In fact, they have dismantled various arms of national security. Today, they don't have proper coast guards protecting our borders. The Prime Minister complained that killing machines were coming into Trinidad and Tobago and ended up in the hands of criminals. But today, they cannot tell us how many Coast Guard vessels are up and operational when these weapons flow through our neighboring countries. And I believe Mr. Sturge will also go into some details with respect to those particular matters. Then, we were then told, listen, we have a regulation, and it's published at Regulation 11, which gives something called a gun amnesty. Mr. Ramdeen, attorney at law, instructed by Ms. Dayade Hari Prasad, would have sent a pre-action protocol letter to the Attorney General's office. And subsequently, the point was raised by Mrs. Prasad Bisessa, the opposition leader, whether or not this regulation was in fact lawful, simply because Section 90 of the Constitution provides that the Director of Public Prosecutions he is the sole person and has the only constitutional remit to determine whether to initiate, discontinue, or take over any criminal prosecution in Trinidad and Tobago. Then we were told by the Attorney General through press release on Thursday evening, late in the evening, that the government decides to now revoke that provision that deals with the gun amnesty. And he gives two reasons, the Attorney General. He says, one, they lift it from the 2011 regulations. They lift it. You know what that means? They copy and paste from the 2011 regulations. And the second point he tells us is that the gun amnesty is not government policy. So when Cabinet met around 1:07 a.m. on the 30th of December, and Cabinet agreed to these regulations, and that regulation would have had the gun amnesty in it, all of them agreeing to it, then you come a few weeks later to tell us, no, that's not our policy. We make a mistake and copy and paste it from the 2011 state of emergency. This state of emergency is, again, we are saying, not well thought out. It is actually vai. They're operating vai with respect to this. And there will be more amendments to come. There will be more amendments to come, because the first amendment was because they forgot to include what the penalties are if you breach any of the regulations. Imagine a fundamental issue like that. And you know who was the acting Attorney General at that time? Stuart Young. That is the anointed Prime Minister by Dr. Rowley. The anointed. I believe his coronation will take place somewhere in March or so. And we have our reasons why it will be in March, because there's a particular pension that has to be increased before, a salary has to be increased so that a particular office holder will have his pension before he leaves at that new salary that the SRC would have had. So these are all matters that we have raised, that they are operating in a vai manner, vai, that cabinet 1 minute agreeing to a gun amnesty, tell the president, proclaim the legislation, proclaim the regulations with the gun amnesty, and they come a few weeks later and say, well, we made an error, that's not really our policy, we'll delete it now. That is not how you run a country. A state of emergency has serious implications. It is a trigger that suspends various constitutional rights and privileges under Section 4 and 5. So you cannot be acting in such a callous, reckless, negligent manner. And this government is not concerned about crime, you know. They're not concerned about fighting crime and criminals, you know. They right now are concerned about the leadership of the PNM. That is their big concern. When the state of emergency was announced, what they were doing, they were gallivanting in Tobago, pulling straw and pulling string and having vote in closed rooms in a villa to determine who will be the leader of the PNM. They had no idea what was happening on the ground. They should have been all hands on deck with respect to national security to determine the way forward with these criminals. And I want Kivan to play a particular video of some comments that Minister Young would have made in the parliament. And I want you all to pay attention to what he said.
We have had states of emergency that have affected us in the last few decades, in the 1990, 2011, and for those who are around, in 1970 as well. When one looks at the regulations, the emergency power regulations of 1990, and does a side-by-side comparison with the emergency power regulations of 2011, there is absolutely no difference. When you compare it to the regulations, the emergency power regulations of 2024, as I will do for the population, because this population deserves the truth, they will see a very committed and calculated difference between the regulations. But the first point I'd like to make, Madam Speaker, is a state of emergency is declared as a last resort.
So, Siu Chung made 2 points. The 2 points he made, one, that the regulations were not a copy and paste really of the 2011 regulations because they tried their best to distance themselves from that 2011 state of emergency. And what he admitted is that they did, in fact, he denied, that they copy and paste. And then AMO comes and says, well, no, we actually took it out from the 2011 regulations. And the second point he made is this, which is fundamental. He said the state of emergency was called as a last resort. As a last resort. The evidence is compelling now that the state of emergency has failed. It is not effectively dealing with the crime situation. It is not effectively dealing with the gang situation. So if this is your last resort, then you have run out of all plans, all ideas whatsoever. And the only thing that you can possibly do right now is to call the elections. And that is our position in the United National Congress. The political leader, the opposition leader, in fact laid out several plans of how we intend to deal with national security. One, with respect to dividing the Ministry of National Security into 3 different arms. With respect to the looking at the criminal justice system, making it more effective and more fair. With respect to stand your ground laws. With respect to making gun ownership easier upon law-abiding citizens so that they can defend themselves against the criminal elements in Trinidad and Tobago. And there are a whole host of other plans that we have rolled out throughout the weeks and months in 2024. And we, again, during the campaign, will roll out more and more of our plans with respect to how we are going to deal with national security and the criminal justice system. And the numbers are clear. Nobody could dispute it. Every single time that United National Congress is in power, crime goes down. And every time the PNM is in power, crime goes up. So I'm leaving issues with respect to the state of emergency at this point. The other issue that I had intended to raise, which I stated in my introduction, was with respect to the sale, leasing, and disposal of the Petrotrin refinery. And on Friday, I sat on the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal. And before us were representatives from the Ministry of Finance and the Office of the Procurement Regulator. And issues were raised with respect to the effectiveness, the challenges with respect to the full proclamation of the public procurement legislation. And the public procurement regulator indicated that currently there is an insufficient staff complement at her office, and those are matters that we will deal with in the upcoming days. But what was more important that I wish to raise this morning is this. Under the law at section 57A, and I'll take my time with this because it's a complex matter. When the public procurement legislation was passed, it was subsequently amended in 2016 to include a provision, section 5757A, and it states this: notwithstanding the State Lands Act and any other written law to the contrary, the minister, that's the Minister of Finance, may make regulations in respect of the disposal of state lands, real property owned by the government, real property owned by state-controlled enterprises, and real property owned by a statutory body, responsibility for which is assigned to a Minister of Government. And 2, these regulations made under the section shall be subject to negative resolution of Parliament. So we are clear in our mind that the sale or the assets which Petrotrin holds in terms of the refinery, in terms of the bungalows, with respect to all the other amenities and facilities, will be defined as state lands or state property according to the Public Procurement Act. And the legislation requires the Minister of Finance to make regulations to regulate the disposal of any state lands, so that will include the refinery. And therefore, when those regulations are made, it will ensure that there is a fair bidding process, a fair assessment process, and a fair awarding of the contract to whoever is the successful party. When the procurement regulator and the Ministry of Finance appeared before us on Friday, and these are matters I can raise in the public domain because they were placed on public record, the committee has not yet reported. The Ministry of Finance provided a response to us of why, because we asked why there are no regulations for the disposal of state lands. We were told that the regulations were drafted in fiscal year 2021 to 2022 and were submitted to the Cabinet on 2 occasions in 2023, but not approved. It then says that there were important legal processes enshrined in other laws that they did not want to affect. And then it says, as a result of these concerns, the draft regulations have been completely revamped and currently in the process of being finalized within the Ministry of Finance for submission to the Cabinet. The expected time frame would be within 2 months, as the regulations, once approved by Cabinet, would be subject for review and amendment by the Legislative Review Committee. 2 months. We were told last week, and there's an article from the Trinidad Guardian by Kaulessa Alonso, and the article states government closer to choosing refinery buyer, and it says that final proposals for the 3 shortlisted bidders interested in the sale or lease of the state-owned Petrotrin refinery are expected to be submitted on January 27th. This was disclosed yesterday by General Manager at Paria, Mushtaq Mohammed, who added that meetings are also planned with the Evaluation Committee for February 6 and 7 to review the final submissions by these 3 offerers. So currently, they are assessing offers for the refinery without these regulations. Now, that is a fundamental issue, because what it does is now removes the jurisdiction, or gives no jurisdiction to the Office of Procurement Regulator to supervise the sale of this. This is one of the largest assets that belongs to the government. It is $1 billion group of assets, and they are going to dispose of this without supervision by the Public Procurement Act and the Public Procurement Regulator. And it is a delay tactic on their end that they are dragging their feet on the approval of these regulations because they want to dispose of it in which manner they would like. You remember what happened earlier when they brought in a man called Jindal, and what happened? They do not want the population, they do not want the regulator to see what they are doing. They are dragging their feet on these regulations, because this act was proclaimed since the 26th of April 2023. And I asked the question in the Joint Select Committee, and I want to ask Ivan to play that video, and you will hear the silence of the procurement regulator when I ask about whether or not they can sell a refinery without these regulations. So can I ask, maybe this might fall under the OPR, and this is a question that we may have to think of. Can we dispose of the refinery without these regulations because the act is fully proclaimed?
Member, I'll be honest, I cannot say. I don't want to, I haven't thought through that. But even in the absence of regulations specifically, we did provide some guidance on the disposal, guidance related to best practice in disposal of real property, and best practice in alignment with the requirements of the Act, right? That is as far as the OPR went in this particular matter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So you would have heard the absolute silence in the room when the question was asked, whether or not you can sell the refinery without the regulations, because the Public Procurement Act has been fully proclaimed, including the section that deals with the disposal of state lands and state property. And I want to take Minister Imbert back to his own words, because he is the one who included this as minister in the legislation. He made the amendment in 2016. And he told the Parliament this, and I want to quote his Hansard dated the 20th of May 2016. This is what Imbert said. Finally, Madam Speaker, a very, very important part in the previous act for reasons best known to the previous government, they left out state lands, totally out the disposal of state lands. We do not know why, we suspect why, but we do not know why, so that the disposal of valuable state lands was left out of the procurement system, and we will have none of it. So we have put it back in. And I think any fair-minded person will agree that there must be scrutiny of the disposal of state lands. You cannot have a situation where we are bringing in a sophisticated new procurement system to look at tenders for goods and services and box train and leave out something like the disposal or the lease of Invaders Bay. He gave that example, which I am told is worth $1 billion and can no longer count in such a situation. So Imbert is telling the Parliament that there's a sophisticated procurement system, that when you are disposing of valuable state lands in the amounts of billions of dollars, you need scrutiny. You need to ensure that the regulator has jurisdiction and oversight over these matters. And when it comes to disposing the largest state enterprise or entity or assets that we have, they are not proclaiming the regulations. So I want to ask Imbert, we do not know why, but we suspect why you are not proclaiming the draft the regulations for the disposal of state lands. Just like how you had your suspicions, well, we have our suspicions also, Minister Imbert. So we call on the government, do not dispose of the Point Lisas refinery, the Petrotrin assets, without the regulations that deals with the disposal of state lands. We warn the government, we warn the public servants that we will be in government very soon, and this is a matter that must and will be thoroughly investigated. We call on all right-thinking public servants, do not be bullied by this government. They are on their way out. So I thank you very much, members of the media, for your attention on these two matters, and I now pass on the platform to Mr. Sturge to address you. Mr. Sturge.
Thank you, Saddam. Good morning, members of the media. Good morning, viewers looking on locally and beyond our shores. I address you in the context of us being under a national state of emergency and against the backdrop of our second double murder for the year occurring last night. Ladies and gentlemen, the PNM government hasn't articulated a crime plan to tell us what they will do henceforth to deal with runaway violent crime. We don't expect them to articulate anything because had they had a clue, they would have been implementing it right now. The much touted 10-point crime plan, which they parroted as the magic bullet between 2010 and 2015, has failed spectacularly, and it was fully implemented. Stuart Young, who for the last 10 years was the Siamese twin of Keith Rowley, from 2015 to now, they were joined at the hip, and now he is Rowley 2.0, or Rowley Reloaded, has not articulated a crime plan. So to vote Stuart Young means you don't want change, that you are comfortable with violent crime. If you even consider doing that, voting him, then it means that you don't want change because he was, at some point, the Minister of National Security, and his presence had zero impact. The government spent the last 10 years trying to fix the criminal justice system by legislation and only made it worse. They spent the last decade dealing with the criminal justice system, which is the tail end of the problem. The criminal justice system gets involved long after the crime is already committed, long after the home invasion, long after the rape, long after the murder, and only after the offender is detected. But our detection rate is an abysmal single digit. Our conviction rate is also abysmal, and they haven't addressed the reasons why and how to solve these things. They haven't done anything meaningful to improve the detection rate, and it only takes an ounce of common sense to know that before detection, there's prevention. Short-term and long-term. Long-term being root cause, short-term proximal causes. And ladies and gentlemen, that is what our country cries out for. That is what our citizens deserve. Effective crime prevention, much more than dealing with it at the tail end of the criminal justice system when you already have a single-digit detection rate, and when there's detection, an abysmal conviction rate. They haven't addressed an issue which is at the forefront of many people. Why are so many police officers before the courts? Why are so many members of our protective services before the courts? Ladies and gentlemen, crime cannot flourish without the involvement of members of the protective services. That is a fact. That is a fact. Whilst most police officers are well-intentioned, hardworking, and honest, there is an unacceptable percentile of police officers who are facilitating criminal conduct, facilitating criminal gangs, providing support. Just read the papers and you'll see police officers charged with gang members and for providing support. It only takes an ounce of common sense, ladies and gentlemen, to know why there are so many assassinations that go unsolved. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know how to fix it. We intend to fix it. part of the problems in terms of long-term stems from our system of education. A system of education that the PNM boasts about, but which in reality, at this point in our existence, is downright anachronistic, irrelevant, disempowering, and ends up disenfranchising too many of our youth. Our government, particularly in the last 10 years, has been setting up our young men for failure. Many of them ending up in the funeral home, many of them ending up in the criminal justice system, many of them starting off simply as first-time offenders, and by the time they leave the prisons, heads of gangs. And it goes on and on. There are no opportunities, no options, no hope for our young people. They've provided none in the last 10 years. But they have fixed NCB Global Finance and their financiers. What they've done is put into practice what the Honorable Prime Minister Rowley said on the morning after the 2020 elections, that they've left the ordinary man, the ordinary youth, to fight to eat the crumbs that fall off the table when he creates opportunities for the rich. So another part of dealing with crime in the long term would be social services. And our social services are not reaching the most vulnerable. We intend to fix that. This system where those most vulnerable, for instance, must leave Toko. They live on $20 or $40 a day. They leave Toko to go to try to access grants and so on in Sandy Grande, then to be told by a public servant, you need to get this document and that document, which pushes the remedy further down the road. And when someone has to spend $20 in transport from Toko to Sandy Grande and then not get what they went for, then do you really expect them to take the chance to come back again? You see, many of us don't know that. But when you go on the ground and you see how poor people actually live, do you really expect them to wager the $40 that is meant to buy bread and cheese and peanut butter for their children for the next morning for school or when they come home from school? Do you really expect them to wager that in transportation to go to get social services and then not get it? This must change. The classroom, the teacher must be the front line of social services in our education system. You must have a system where teachers can liaise directly with social workers assigned to the school, and where the social worker is the middleman who ensures that what is needed, whether it is homework supervision, whether it is the student not having books, whether it is the student not having shoes or uniforms, or whatever is disrupting the student at home, that these things are fixed. You cannot expect our young people, particularly in single mother households and so on, where the single mother has to go out and earn, and where the child goes to school hungry or without resources whilst his compatriots have the resources. You cannot expect him to benefit from the system of education. You cannot expect him to do his best. Those in Trinidad and Tobago who get through our education system and excel, they do it not because of the system of education provided by the PNM, but they do it in spite of this failing system of education. It is a testament to their resilience, and many times it is a testament to their resources. So, ladies and gentlemen, we intend to fix that. I am the UNC candidate for Toko Sandy Grande, a constituency which contributes so much to our country but gets very little in return. one of the poorest constituencies in this country. I intend to fix that in Soko Sangre Grande by becoming a full-time member of parliament. Toko Sangre Grande will be my project, and Toko Sangre Grande will lead the way to show what is possible. In the same way, I left school so many years ago with nothing, with 0 passes, but had the opportunity to turn it all around. I am going to show, and I intend to share my formula with the youth in Toko Sangre Grande, that they can be equal to and better than the youth of Westmoreland. I will prove it to them that if I can do it, coming from Belmont, Serrano Road to be particular, which is now a battlefield between them and Bella Road, where I also spent some time in my youth. I intend to show it that if I can do it, and if others from these communities can do it, that they can do it. So, ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you put aside party loyalty, because this is a critical time in our history when we must help Generation Z to come forward and to be better. We cannot have a system of education where those who get out of it successfully, many of them go abroad, do well, and it's in essence a brain drain. We must have a system of education where every student doesn't have to be academic. Every student is a student of quality. So even when the best leave, those who stay behind will be high quality in every sector, whether it's academics, whether it's agriculture, business, what have you. We intend to fix that. Give us our opportunity to fix it. The PNM they've had 10 years to fix it. They've shown, the Siamese twins, they've shown they've done nothing in 10 years. All they've shown is that they are incapable of fixing it, but capable of fixing themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Members of the media, I want to just thank Mr. Sturge for his presentation. We now open the floor for any questions that members of the media may have. Yeah? Yeah, Sturge will also be here. Sturge. Yeah.
All right, good day, Kimmery Fletcher, Guardian Media Limited. Both of you touched on the SOE, but top of my head, Mr. Sturge was just speaking about rogue police officers and their contribution to the level of crime right now. And it brought me back to the Prime Minister's comments about police officers hiding, right? I mean, what do you have to say about that? Because I know that got some backlash from the Police Officers Association saying that that is something that would encourage criminals or empower criminals, right? But when we have police officers also involved in crime, is that a statement that you agree with? And if not so, what do you think needs to be done if you are placed in government to deal with rogue police officers?
Well, first things first, we heard from Mr. Hines, who said the day before the Prime Minister made that comment, that criminals were running in fear. So it's amazing that the very next day, the Prime Minister is saying that the police were hiding and cowering in fear. Now, how you fix that is this. You have to, not only by legislation, increase the penalties, but you have to be able to detect it. And one of the things you need to do, if you have a PSB, a Professional Standards Bureau in Trinidad and Tobago, staffed with local police officers, do you really think that things can be kept secret? No. There are ways in which persons are alerted. So PSB investigates police officers, but I've seen instances where PSB or officers in PSB notified persons who they say were their batch, that's the term, and if they do that, they in essence frustrate the process. What you need to do, it doesn't take a very large contingent, but you need persons from outside. I know they don't like that. They didn't like Gibbs. They didn't like Iwatsky, right? And they ran them out of here. But the truth is, you need to have persons who have no connection to the local police. That's just one way. We have other ways, but the thing is, at this juncture, it's not to say, because national security is that sort of thing, that you can't basically say, in essence, too much of what you intend to do.
Right.
And I could probably just, some of the plans that the party will roll out is one dealing with, and Sturge touched on it, how quickly we dispose of matters. And we have indicated that there will be specialized courts in some instances. So those specialized courts can deal with these matters very quickly. I would also invite you to look at something called the Police Manpower Audit Report, and you will see how long it takes sometimes for one disciplinary matter to be finished. There was one occasion where there were 32 adjournments of a disciplinary matter before the police tribunal. So those are some of the issues that we have in fact identified, and we will deal with it in terms of be it regulations and or legislation.
I heard you mention it today, and I heard you mention it previously in the parliament during the debate, speaking about the SOE regulations, and that some of these powers given to police officers, defense officers, defense service as well, were already implemented in other things, for example, the Bail Act, etc. So is it a matter of now in the judiciary system that they are confused as in which one they should go, or is that the SOE regulations just overrides it?
So no, none overrides none. There's existing law and there's the emergency powers regulation. So it is for the prosecutor to now determine which piece of legislation he wants to charge under, and then it will be for the judicial officer to determine the matter. And I would point you back to that article when the acting chief magistrate asked the police officer, why did you charge under the emergency powers regulation and not the Firearms Act? Because that carries a stiffer penalty. So you are actually confusing the police officers now when you are in the state of emergency giving powers that already exist or creating offenses that already exist. They should have used these regulations, think of them properly, and include powers that maybe are not in existing law. That would have been the most common sense thing to do at this point in time.
Right. And not connecting it to, but since I have attorneys here, and I know there was a lot of fear amongst attorneys since we had the killing of the state prosecutor Randall Hector, but also the double murder, as you mentioned, your friend, your colleague, that another attorney, not saying that the both are linked, but do you think there is an attack, and both could answer, personally believe there's an attack on attorneys right now?
I believe it will get worse. And yes, there is an attack. There's no evidence that the killing in Kumoto Manzanilla is anything but a human invasion at this point. But we've had 2 prosecutors killed in the last 10 years. So it is not unfathomable that if things remain the same, there's likely to be, some more. I'm not wishing it. We are hoping against it. But having heard some of the things that persons at the elements say, it's not going to stop at prosecutors. Very soon they'll come after us, because there are many prisoners who say that they blame the defense lawyers for the delay in the criminal justice system, when the truth is we have no control. We can only try to pressure for a start. But there are prisoners who have said, just now we'll start killing you all out. So it's out there. It's quite possible. And after the defense lawyers, who next? It's quite possible. We've descended into that place, unfortunately, and we have to try to reverse it. Not saying that the life of a prosecutor or a defense attorney is any more valuable than a citizen, but the short point is we have to try to reach to a place where we give people a fair trial in a reasonable time. If Jamaica can do it, if Barbados can do it, we can do it. We have to do it within a reasonable time. And once you do that, then there's finality. There's either an acquittal and people are free to go their way, or there's a conviction and people are punished. But you can't leave people in limbo. They always say our system is like Alice in Wonderland, because for much of the crime, the punishment is a deprivation of liberty. But the reality is people are charged, deprived of their liberty for many years, in fact, sometimes even as much as 20 years, and then they win. So that's in essence Alice in Wonderland, where the king said, well, you are guilty, now let's hear the evidence. That can't continue to be the status quo.
Right. From your experience, I believe right now there were 2 persons placed under house arrest, right? I remember in a police press conference, I asked the question, well, how long can someone remain under house arrest? And at the time, it was up to the discretion of the commissioner of police. But I believe it could go up to 3 months in the first trial, and then they could ask again, something like that, right? How effective do you think that is?
Well, I'll put it to you this way. I am told that the one person that was under house arrest is no longer under house arrest. And the second point is that in 2011, we passed a landmark piece of legislation in this country. It's called the Administration of Justice Electronic Monitoring Act. It took the PNM about 6 or 7 years to try to put the infrastructure in place after we left them with the law. And that piece of legislation, groundbreaking as it is, will actually enhance or give law enforcement intelligence with respect to monitoring their movements, rather than just placing someone under house arrest. That is a temporary fix for a particular period of time. The state of emergency can only last for so long. You have to look at long-term enforcement and long-term effectiveness in terms of dealing with these criminals.
Well, I want to add to that, because if there are only 2 persons who are the subject of detention orders, is it that these 2 persons are responsible for all of the killing that's going on? That's foolish. If you are not effectively targeting and having detention orders against those who are really responsible, a lot of times it's behind bars. These persons are behind bars. If you are not dealing with that, then detaining 2 persons, that's a drop in the ocean. You know, I'll say, I went to the prison recently, and whilst I was waiting, there was a prison officer with a really big firearm on his phone going through TikTok. And I have to wonder, that could only be possible if the jammers are on. If you really want things to stop, it should be off, right? So these are a number of things you need to consider. And having 2 persons detained, that's not success.
Right. I know you all are both quite passionate, and your experiences in law, your experience with criminals, once placed in government, if the UNC wins the election, is it that you all see yourself getting a ministerial positions? For example, Attorney General, Mr. Sturge, what about Minister of National Security? What do you feel about that?
That is a position within the sole discretion of the incoming Prime Minister, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, and I'll leave it right there.
Let me get your response.
My response is, I just indicated that I intend to be a full-time MP because Toko Sandigrande is beset and besieged with lots of problems, lots of unemployed youths, and things need to start working there. Whilst I would be flattered if I'm offered a ministerial post, I think in the first 3 years, I've set myself a time limit. In the first 3 years, I would like to put into effect programs to see how we can benefit particularly the youth in Toko Sandigrande, and then see how we can spread that initiative outside. Of course, it will be ongoing other programs island-wide, but Toko Sandigrande and a few other communities need to be addressed immediately.
Your Honor, I didn't hear any no's still, but yes, thank you.
Sorry?
I said, Your Honor, I didn't hear any no's from them officially.
No, I said it's implicit that it's no.
Implicit, definitely.
Yeah.
MP only.
Yeah.
All right, okay. Just shifting it quickly, we are seeing a facelift or a shift within the People's National Movement. We're seeing younger faces, no pun intended, young being at the helm, but also like right on the front page here of The Guardian, we're seeing hands out in front for MP position. I mean, how are you all feeling about the shift that you all are seeing within the party?
So we don't comment on internal PNM issues. That's not our jurisdiction. We are here to deal solely with national issues.
Okay.
Whatever bacchanal is happening in the PNM, that's their business. Once it affects the governance of Trinidad and Tobago, we raise issue. They are currently imploding. We are currently uniting. Our house is in order. We are just waiting on the election date. And we are ready to form the next government. We have indicated our plans and our policies. And all we're waiting now is for that date to fall out either the young man back pocket or the golfer back pocket.
All right, great. Thank you.
That's it. Thank you very much, members of the media, for joining us today. I again want to thank Mr. Sturge for making himself available to join us on the media conference. And please join us again next week for our regular weekly media briefing under the auspices of the opposition leader, Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisas, and we thank you very much.